So we're here on Daf Chav Ches Amid Aleph. We're going to count up from the bottom up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines up. And the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Hoisa achas mehen. We'll read the whole thing. Hoisa achas mehen asura ala echad, isur erva, osur ba, umuter biachosa, masheni osur b'shtein. What happens is that two sisters fall for Yibum to two brothers, but one of the two sisters is an erva to one of the two brothers. Let's say, for example, she's chamosa, and now he can be miyabim the other sister because there's no achos kukaso, because the chamosa, the erva, is not zkuka liyibum. But as far as the other brother is concerned, two sisters are falling for Yibum to him, so there's a zikas Yibum to two sisters, and that generates an iser of achos skukasa. So whereas one of the two brothers can be miyabim the one candidate, there is only one candidate from his perspective because the other one is his mother-in-law, the other brother cannot be miyabim either of these two sisters because each one is achos ish, or achos kukasa, to be more precise. So now, in order to appreciate the Gemara's kasha, we have to open up the Mishnah Daf Chav. Take a look at the Mishnah on Daf Chav. The Mishnah says, Klal Omru b'Yevamot Kol Shehi Iser Erva. You have it? Yeah? It's actually the first page in the Masechet, this volume. Kol Shehi Iser Erva Lo Choletzes V'lo Misyabemes. Okay? And then we have the following. Oh, Achosa, you have it? So it's about the fourth line down in the Mishnah Daf Chav. Achosa shehi yevimta. So until now we're talking about an erva. Now we're talking about another Yevama who falls for Yibum, and she is Achosa. She is the sister. Is choletzes omes yabemes. The Achosa now lends herself to Yibum. Why? Because the other sister that fell for Yibum was an erva. So it's exactly what we're learning here in our Mishnah Chavav. So the Mishnah Chavav seems to be redundant, and it's a repetition of the Mishnah on Daf Chav. And that's what the Gemara is going to now be mafalpel, why I need both Mishnayos. So the Gemara asks, Hatmina Chadazimna, we already have this in the previous Mishnah. As it says, Achosa Keshehi Yevimta Ocholetzes Omus Yabemes. So if two sisters fall for Yibum, one of whom is an erva, the other sister, who's not an erva, now falls for Yibum. And the reason for that, as we said before, is because there's no zikas Yibum to the erva. There's only a zikas Yibum to one sister. So there's no achos kukaso at all. Now, Rabbosai, let's keep in mind that our Mishnah here on Daf Chavav is a little bit more sophisticated, so to speak, or more complex in terms of the scenario than the Mishnah on Daf Chav. The Mishnah on Daf Chav is talking about two sisters that fell to even to one brother, meaning there is only one brother. Reuven and Shimon, right, were married to two sisters, and then there's a third brother, Levi. Reuven dies, and Shimon dies. So both Rachel and Leah, two sisters, fall for Yibum to Levi. Our Mishnah is talking about a case where there are two brothers who are still alive. Do you follow me? So we're not only talking about Levi, but we're talking about Levi and Yehuda. Now, with regard to Levi, his situation is such that one of these two wives of Reuven or Shimon, whichever one, doesn't matter, is an Erev. But with regard to Yehuda, the other Yavam, the brother, he doesn't have an Erev relationship with either Leah or Rachel. So therefore, he's excluded from Yibum to both Rachel and Leah. Tzricha. And now we're going to, based on this differentiation between the case over there, where there's only one brother, who's a Yavam, and in our case here, where there are two brothers that are Yavam, both Yavams, Tzricha, we need both Mishnayos. Iyashminin Chasam, if we only had the case of one brother, that means the Mishnah on Daf Chaf. Now watch what goes on here, Rabosa. In a case where there are two brothers in our Mishnah, there's an extra chidush that we wouldn't have derived from the first Mishnah when there's only one brother. Why is that so? Because you have two women, in this case two sisters, Rachel and Leah, falling in front of two brothers. Both Rachel and Leah fall for even to both Levi and Yehuda. That's our Mishnah. Now we're going to tell one of these two brothers, Levi, that he can be Miyabe, one of these two sisters. What message are we sending to Yehuda? That he would marry and be Miyabe the other sister, which is not so at all. So the very moment we are permitting and even encouraging Levi to be Miyabe one of the two sisters, we're endangering, we're exposing ourselves to the possibility that Yehuda, the brother of Levi, is going to follow suit. He's going to imitate Levi, and if we'll make a deal here, Levi, you be Miyabe Rachel, and I'll be Miyabe Leah. I mean, that's a logical thing. But in truth, Yehuda is not allowed to be Miyabe the other sister because she's Achos Zikukasa. So Iyashminin Hasam, if we only had the Mishnah back on Daf Chav with one brother, Mishum Delekel Migzar Mishum Sheni Aval Hacha Deikal Migzar Mishum Sheni Ein Malo. If I only had the first Mishnah where there's one brother, how would I know that there's no Gzera? What do I mean? In the case in our Mishnah where there are two brothers, perhaps logically we should block Levi from being Miyamim, that sister that he's allowed to be Miyamim, right? The one who's not an Erev, obviously. But we should block it and forbid it because of Gzeira Mishum Hasheni. If we allow Levi to be Miyamim one of the two sisters, then Yehuda will imitate Levi, and he thinks he can be Miyamim the other sister, which he can't do because she is Achos Zekukasa. Now the Gemara is going to have to switch it around the other way. If we only had our Mishnah, which seems to have an additional chiddush, namely that we don't declare an Iser with Gzeira Mishum Achasheni, then how much more so in the case where there's only one brother? I mean, that doesn't seem to have any chiddush whatsoever. The Iyashmin and Hacha, if we only had our Mishnah, which is teaching us the chiddush of what? Of two brothers, is therefore since the Ika Shnei Sheni, there's another brother, meaning we call him Yehuda, to come Muchach. We have one advantage in the case. Such a trade. The Gemara is saying we have one advantage in the case with the two brothers because we're making a declaration of Achos Kukos. How so? we're telling Yehuda that he cannot be miyabed either one of these two sisters. Why? Why not? Why can't he be miyabed? And there's only one possible answer, because Achos Kukasa. So we're making it a public declaration, which is inherent in this ruling, forbidding Yehuda from being miyabed and forcing him to give chalitza. And that public statement is that there is such a thing, we'll call it an erva, called Achos Kukasa. We haven't made that proclamation in the case of the Mishnah Daf Chaf, where there's only one brother, because they were just addressing Levi, and we're saying to Levi, you have Rachel and Leah. Rachel is your mother-in-law. You can't be miyabim. Go ahead and be miyabim. Who did I say? Rachel. Go ahead and be miyabim Leah, whatever the names are. I'm saying, but we're not telling anybody here. We're not whispering a word about Achos Kukasa. Aval Hasam the Leka Sheni. There's no other brother. Amalo. Right? What does it look like in the eyes of the spectator when Rachel and Leah, the wives of Reuven and Shimon, fall for Yibam to Levi? When we tell Levi to be miyabi one of them, in the eyes of the spectator, he doesn't know. He doesn't realize that the reason he can be miyabi is because there was no nefila for Yibam of the Erva. He sees the two sisters fall for Yibam. And therefore, he thinks that this is a case of Achos Kukaso. And then you encourage Levi, in this case, to go ahead and be miyabi one of these two sisters, the one who's not an erva. Then you're basically saying, in the eyes of the spectator who's mistaken, that there is no such thing as an erva of Achos Kukaso. So we can't allow that. We can't jeopardize, right? We can't expose ourselves to that vulnerable possibility that the mistake will be made, that there's no such thing as an Isser Erev of Achos Kukasa, which in truth, there is an Isser Erev of Achos Kukasa. And this woman that we're telling Levi to be Miyabim is not Achos Kukasa, because the other sister is not his Kuka, it's his mother-in-law. She's an Erev. Is Tricha. Therefore, I need the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek, back on Daf Chav, to establish that even though there's only one brother, we're not concerned with the possibility that it will be misinterpreted and the spectator will conclude mistakenly that you're allowed to be miyabim achos kukasa. Now, I would like to just take a minute of your time to analyze the Hava meaning. If we only had the second Mishnah and not the first Mishnah. The other way around, if we only had the first Mishnah and we didn't have the second Mishnah, that I understand. Once you're instructing Levi to go ahead with Yibam, with one of the sisters, the message might come to Yehuda mistakenly that he should be having another sister. But when we go the opposite direction, meaning if I only had the second Mishnah, I wouldn't derive the head to the first Mishnah that we can encourage Levi to be having one of the two sisters. That I find a little difficult. Why? What's the worst case scenario? In other words, if all our fears would come to fruition, then the word is going to get out that there's no such erva as achos kukas. Because again, the people in the bleachers, who are witness spectators, they're not aware of the fact that this is not a case of achos kukasa because one of the two sisters is an erva. And because of that, in the Havamina, we're going to tell Levi to give chalitza to his mother-in-law's Sarah, if you find to the other sister, and forfeit the mitzvah of Yibum. Now, what's on the balance over here? What's on the balance is that chas v'sholom, heaven forbid, people are going to think that achos kukaso is subject to Yibum. They don't realize that it's an erva and it requires chalitza, and Yibum is not a possibility. And because of that, you're going to forfeit the mitzvah d'oraisa of Yibum. That when we analyze the Havamina, it sounds counterintuitive, or it sounds like antithetical to what you and I would say, I mean, even in the worst case scenario, Achos Kukasu is only an Isa Darabanan. On a Torah level, he should be Miyamin. And here she's not an Achos Kukasu in the Mishnah back on Daf Chav. Meaning Achos Kukasu means that there's a Zika to both sisters. There is no Zika to both sisters. So you're going to forfeit a mitzvah d'oraisa for the sake of protecting, guaranteeing, right, the observance of the Darabanan. Doesn't make sense to me. What do you say? Well, in the case of Shofar Shabbos, I'm willing to give up on a mitzvah d'oraisa in order to protect Til Shabbos. Til Shabbos a chiv skila. And with all due respect to Shofar, a lulav, a begillah, whatever it is, that's only a mitzvah. I'm not trying to be mizalza, but it doesn't shine a light to the violation of Shabbos, of Shem Yavimenu Daled Avos. But here, you're going to forfeit a mitzvah d'oraisa for the sake of protecting some sort of an isa which the Rabbanan created. That doesn't sound like a fair trade-off. Again, maybe the maskana is my, but I want to understand the halacha.
That goes.
You say, John?
There's Zika, right? That's
the normal case. The Mishnah at the beginning of on Daf Chav is talking about an unusual case where it happens to be that because of erva, there's no Zika to that particular sister. There's only a Zika to the other sister. We're worried about a case where there's a Zika to both sisters. Neither of them is an erva.
That's Rabbanan.
And that's the Rabbanan. On a Daraisa level, the Torah says that you should be miyabima. I mean, Yesh Zika is, with all the respect, is a Rabbanan. It's not a Daraisa. We've seen this in the past. So for the sake of it's almost a little bit like Xeril. You know, we're afraid of the spectator. And what in the worst case scenario, if the spectator makes that error, what's going to terribly tragically happen? He'll be miyavim achos kukasa. That's exactly what the Torah wants him to do. And the Rabbanan don't want him to do it because yesh zika. They're going to elevate and upgrade the status of zika to a kind of quasi-ishus. But in order to protect the Rabbanan, we therefore want to give up and forfeit a mitzvah d'oraisa of Yibam. And I can explain my question on two levels. On a lavdisha level in terms of halacha, why give up on a mitzvah d'oraisa of Yibam, which is a mitzvah of great significance, for the sake of protecting an Yisud Rabbanan? And on an emotional level, I can ask my question because now, if this woman wants Yibam, and the Torah wants Yibam, l'hakim shein li'achid, and give up on that because of what? The possibility of violating an Yisud Rabbanan. The only answer I could give, again, Ramos, if you have a better answer, please give it. But is that if we were dealing with this case alone, there would never be such a habit. But we're not dealing with this case alone. We're dealing with future cases. In other words, when we take the overall picture of two sisters falling for Yibum, and the Rabbanan said that in such a case, cholzos below misyabos, we're going to risk undermining that entire takana, or shall we say, Isa Rabbanan of Achos Kukasa, for the sake of one individual mitzvah Yibum. She's not an aguna. She'll get chalitza and she'll marry someone else, hopefully. We're rooting for her. But what you're doing is you're jeopardizing, you're endangering the entire enterprise of Achos Kukaso as a rabbinic Isa. And I grant you it's only the Rabbanan, but nevertheless, people are going to walk out of here thinking there is no such thing as Achos Kukaso. That can have implications way down the line. You're really tampering or endangering the entire future of this disabled. That's the only thing I could come up. Okay. Now, again, let's keep one finger on the Mishnah on Daf Chav and another finger on the Mishnah back on Daf Chav, because again, the Gemara says there's a repetition here. It says here, on Daf Chavav, Oh, so we're looking at line 4, the end of line 4 on Daf Chava. And it says, Iser mitzvah ve'Iser kedusha choletzes v'lo misyabemes. Let's just review just the basics here, and then we'll compare this to the Mishnah back on Daf Chav. We're talking about a case where one of the two sisters is an erva d'Rabbanan, what's called shnios la'rayos, to one of the two brothers. Let's say, for example, let's say a shnios la'rayos falls for Yibum together with her sister to Levi. We'll call her Rachel. Okay, so Rachel is what's called shnios la'rayos. It's only the Rabbanon, and she falls to Levi. Okay, we'll get back to Isur Kedusha in a minute. I'm just jumping to the punchline, so to speak, for our purpose. And the Mishnah says, Choletzes v'lo misyabemes, which means that both sisters, Rachel and Leah, need chalitza and do not have the option, they're not candidates for Yibum to either of the two brothers that are surviving. Correct? So again, it's a case where Reuven and Shimon are married respectively to Rachel and Leah. They have two other brothers, Levi and Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon died, and neither Levi nor Yehuda are allowed to be miyabim, either of the sisters. So it's always going to be choletzes v'lo misyabemes. Now the reason for that is because since we're not talking about an erva d'oraisa in this case, so Levi's relationship to let's say Rachel is only d'Rabbanan, and therefore Levi should be allowed to be miyabim Leah, the other sister, right, on the basis of the erva d'Rabbanan. But the answer is it's only an erva d'Rabbanan. On a d'oraisa level, Rachel herself falls for Yibum to Levi no less than Leah does, even though Rachel is a shniya la'rayos, but that's only the Rabbanan. So now the Mishnah is insisting on the Isur of Achos Kukaso because of the Doraisa status of Rachel is Leah as a Zkukalo. And this is in contrast to the Reish of the Mishnah, where let's say Rachel was a mother-in-law to Levi, which means she was also to Levi with an Isur Doraisa. Here we're talking about an erva of the status of shnios la'rayos. I'm just wondering if he gives an example here. Just a second. I don't see that he gives examples. Okay, we had many examples of shnios la'rayos. Now, what's Isur Kedusha? That's an Isur Lot. Like, for example, a Mamzeres, a Nesina, or perhaps a Grusha to a Kohen. Now, keeping this Mishnah open here, Chavav, we go back to the Mishnah on Daf Chaf, and it seems like a repetition. Because the Mishnah on Daf Chaf says the following. Towards the, let's say, the middle of the Mishnah, it says, Isur mitzvah means shnios, b'divrei sof. Correct? And then it says Isur Kedusha, which we said is an Isur Doraisa, but not an Isur Kar, it's an Isur Lav. And the Mishnah gives an example of almana lekoin god, or grusha v'chalus lekoin hedgehog, or mamzeres in Israel, or vas Yisrael lenosin l'mams. And in all these cases, we go back to the Mishnah that says achosa shehi yevimto choletzes. Bless you, bless you. Is
Well, it's a mystery.
oh, very good. So I started a little bit later. It says Isur mitzvah. Where is it? Isur. There it is. Sorry. Isur mitzvah, but Isur kedusha. Choletzes v'lomus yabemus. Okay. And then the Mishnah explains what's an Isur kedusha, what's an Isur mitzvah. So I skipped that line. So basically, we have a repetition here of what it says over there. So that's the Gemara's language. Hanami tnina. Now we turn to Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis. Isur mitzvah, Isur kedusha, choletzes v'lomus yabemus. So the Gemara answers Hasam be Isur mitzvah lechuda hacha Isur mitzvah va'achosa. So in the Mishnah, back on Daf Chaf, we're talking about a case where one Yevama falls to Yibum, and she is in the category of Asura be'Isur mitzvah, which we call Shniyas Larayos. And the Mishnah is established that because of the Isur Derabanan of Shniyas Larayos, therefore there's no Yibum, and we don't allow Yibum. We can allow and require Chalitz. Okay. Now we get to our Mishnah. And in our Mishnah, we're not talking about Yevama Achas, but rather we're talking about two Yevamos, one of which is a Shniyah Larayos, Isur mitzvah, Hacha Isur mitzvah ve'achosa. So there are two sisters falling for Yibum, one of whom is an Erev D'Rabbanan Shniyas Larayos. So what's the additional chiddush in our Mishnah? Sal kedai techamina leikum Isur mitzvah bimkom Isur erva v'tisyabim. Perhaps we should say the following: that let's equate erva d'Rabbanan with erva d'oraisa, and if we do so, then he should be able to be miyabim the other sister. In other words, let's forget about the d'oraisa status. Let's just focus totally on the d'Rabbanan status. On a level of d'Rabbanan, what we have is an erva. We've already established at the beginning of our Mishnah that if one of those two sisters is an erva, he could be miyabim the other sister. Ashmalan, the Mishnah wants to teach us that on we go back to the d'oraisa status. On a d'oraisa status, we have a real zika. And on a d'oraisa status, because the Torah doesn't recognize the erva of Shniyos Larayos, therefore he has a chiyuv yibum. If he has a chiyuv yibum and a filu yibum, we're going back to zika, which means achos kukasa. So now the Gemara is not happy with the Hava.
The same question.
Yeah, how could it be that in the Havamina we're going to allow. I'm sorry. In the Havamina we're going to ignore the erva of achos ishto. I'm sorry, achos kukaso. Again, when I say achos ishto, I mean achos kukaso. And therefore, we're going to allow for yibum because we're going to say that the erva of shniyos larayis removes the zika. Hence, there's only one of the two sisters that has the zika yibum, and it'll be miyavim. How can you say such a thing? When the Torah doesn't recognize this erva, and rather the Torah says you have a chiyuv yibum, so it's mamish achos ishto. So the Gemara says, "V'tisyaven, could there be such a havamina? Came in the midoraisa ramya kamei. On a doraisa level, both sisters fall for him for yibum. Why? Because there's no erva relationship here. It's only an erva d'Rabbanan. So let's go back to the doraisa halacha. Both fall for yibum. V'kapaga achos kukaso. This is mamish a case of achos kukaso. So again, how could you even raise the possibility of yibum? Yeah, but the answer is that. Just 1 second. Yeah, because on a deraisa level, there is no such thing as achos kukaso. So the Torah would require yibum. So I understand the Havamina very well. We should require yibum and forget about achos kukaso doraisa. Because achos kukaso, the worst case scenario, is only derabon. Gemara says, "Salka daitachamina mishum mitzvah avud rabbanon." For the sake of the mitzvah of yibum, the rabbanon are going to say, let's forget about zika and let's negate the zika based on the erva d'Rabbanan of shniyas larayos. Why would you do such a thing? I mean, on a doraisa level, she is zkuka liyibu, but the Rabbanan are going to remove that zika for the sake of the mitzvah of yibu with the other sister. So again, salkadait chamina mishum mitzvah avud Rabbanan kamash malon. And here's a case where, honestly, I understand the Havamina better than the Maskara. Maskara is, we're going to forfeit the mitzvah of Yibum. We're going to upgrade the status of Shniyos Larayos. No, I'm just the other way around. Mashmalon, why are we going to negate Yibum? Because on a Doraisa level, she's achos kukos. And why is that so? Because the Torah doesn't recognize this erva as an erva. It's only a shniyas larayos. Okay. I mean, you see over and over again that this afkas ibum, which is called achos kukos, is taken very, very seriously. It's not taken. It's not like a regular classic zera d'Rabbanan. I mean, we're just 1 second on the doraisa level. It's achos kukos, correct? Only an erva d'Rabbanan. Therefore, we have to exclude yibum. Why are we excluding yibum? And the answer is because machos kukos, which itself is only d'Rabbanan, but yet we're taking it so seriously, we're going to forfeit the bits of yibum. Okay, let's go on. The Mishnah says, Oisa achas mehen. So Jeff, we're on the top now of Chav Chesed with Beis. Okay. Now the Gemara doesn't quote the entire Mishnah. So we'll quote the entire Mishnah that one of these two sisters is an Iser Erva. And the Mishnah says, Asura lezeh muteres lezeh. Asura lezeh muteres lezeh. So basically, what is the Mishnah teaching me now? I mean, we already established that if she, one of the two sisters, we'll call her Rachel, is an erva to Levi, then Levi could be Miyabim Leah, the other sister. But Yehuda cannot. Just 1 second. This is a 1 second. This is a little bit more complicated. Just what does the Mishnah say? Vaisa achas mihen asur al zeh beiser erva. Oh, vashnia asur al zeh. Oh, okay. So I forgot to add that, right? So what do we have now? We have a situation where each one of these two sisters is an erva to one of the two brothers, respectively, correct? So Rachel is an erva to Levi, and Leah is an erva to Yehuda. So it means that Yehuda could be miyabim Rachel, and Levi could be miyabim Leah. So the Gemara immediately asks, Tasu lamali hainu hach. What have you added here by telling me that the other sister? When I say the other sister, I mean, let's say Rachel is an erva to Levi. So now I'm telling you that the other sister, Leah, is an erva to Yehuda. What did you gain by that? It's basically just another scenario, but it's the same exact principle. You're not adding anything new. Demali lechad, mali litre. Right? We said that if one of them is an erva to one of the brothers, then he can be miyabim the other sister. And now you're just multiplying it by 2. You're applying the same principle twice. Let's just think. Is there a new chiddush here? Again, the Gemara is going to work on this, but I just was wondering if intuitively we can suggest anything. Now we have the other sister. We're watching both brothers be having both sisters. Let's see. Sricha. The Iash meaning Hasam. If we only had the ratio of the Mishnah, is Mishum de Ika Sheni. The Muchach. Right, as we said it earlier, remember this far we said that by ruling that Yehuda cannot be miyabim either of these two sisters, we're sending a clear-cut message that there's such a thing as achos kukasa. That's not going to happen in the case where asura lezeh muteres lezeh. You follow me? Aval hacha deleka sheni de kamochach emolo. Strange. The Gemara seems to be raising a Hava meaning here that we have to go out of our way to publicize the Iser Fachos Kupas. Again, it shows over and over again how unique and severe and heavy is this Iser Fachos Kupas. We have to wave the flag. And in the case where we allow both Levi and Yehuda to be Miyaben, the two sisters, which is our Mishnah, we have lost the opportunity to publicize, to circulate, and reinforce the Easter Erva of Achos Chukos. A separate chiyuv azan that we have to look for every possibility, every opportunity to transmit the message of Achos Chukos. He's able alone. Wow, this is wild. We're going to undermine both Yibum, both the Yibum of Levi to Leah and Yehuda to Rachel. Why? -2. We're going to knock down two Yibums, two mitzvahs of Yibum, vis-a-vis two Yevamots. Why? Because we need to tell the public about Achos Kukos. Well, maybe I went too far. Maybe it's not that we're using this as an opportunity to publicize, but rather, if we allow both to be miyabein both, then the spectator mistakenly concludes that there's no erva of achos kukos. Of the iash minin hacha, if we only had our sefer, so the ratio, we're telling Yehuda that he cannot be the other sister. He can't pick up where her Levi left off. Why? Because achos kukos. Because to Yehuda there's no error. So what's the Gemara say? Iash b'nin hacha. If we had that sefer, then what? So then we are permitting. Why do I need the ratio? Yes, meaning hoch. I guess it means from the fact that we're telling Yehuda that he's not allowed to be miyabim. No. The fact that we're telling just 1 second, I just have to get the mathematics then. The iash me'inon hocha. So Hava, I would have said that here we have a head to Yibum Shadra, David Shekol Echad Me'achim, also Lisas by Mochicha Dodi. Lisa, okay, Achaz, Nashnia, Rola, Vachek, Isa. Yochel Lisa back Achas, Vashnia, Inkan Isa Chos Kos. What does that mean, Inkan Isa Chos Kos? Yeah, because there's no Zika. There's no Zika, so therefore it's not a Chos Kos. Aval Ida, but in the ratio, where there's only one Yavam. Reisha Sharak Mi Yavam Echad. Mutaliyabe. Oh no. In the ratio of the two Yevamim, but only one has the erva to one of the sisters. Afsha Sheni also b'shteyen kiven she'en kan shnayim shemochichim echad al Sheni ef sheyesh tigzar shem yomru shemutul yab machos kukos. So if the other brother is going to be miyabed, the other sister let's try to do this. Some moments there, last piece of the puzzle. In the case, we're saying what? What does muche adodi mean? Oh, in other words, there's no havamina of achos kukas, right? Because we're being matir yibum to both brothers. And that itself is a kind of a statement that there's no achos kukaso. But in the case of the seifa, in the case of the Reisha, we're telling Yehuda that he can't be miyabim either of these two women, either of the two sisters. I don't understand, but that's even, isn't that more of a chacha of a chos ukasa? The of mecha mutuliyam afsha sheni osu b'shtem keven she'en kan shnayim v'mochichim echad al hasheni zar shem yom shemutuliyam achos ukasa. Is more of a chashash, a greater chashash that mutter, people say that it's mutter yabim achos. I don't get it. She's not achos kukasa, but somehow there's a room for xera that she looks like achos kukasa. So what's this idea of mucha? He says shavai mucha adot. I mean, those three words, those are the key. Those three words hold the key to understanding this Gemara. That if I only had the last case, the last case is when both sisters are in error to both brothers, right? Each one respected. If I only had that last case, then I would apply the principle since we're going to be mad both brothers, to be miyabim both sisters. That proves that there's no Isra Chos. If there's only one, also If you're matir only one brother, for Yibum to one of the two sisters, that doesn't prove anything about what? About I mean, the reason why being matir is because she's not a chos kukas. It's not mucha. If we have another brother in the picture, I'm going to be matir to him Yibum for the other sister. We're going to do that matching, right? Both brothers will be having both sisters. Then it's quite clear to the public that there's no achos skukoso. You have any note on it by any chance? No. Just see, he has a marsh, but I'm just afraid that'll take us off the beaten path. It sounds to me like the Gemara is assuming that we know about a chos. And if we're matir both brothers to both sisters, it's the public is going to interpret this as meaning that there's no achos kukas. So there's a situation which is a little bit of gray area. You follow what I mean? It's like the twilight zone. We're not sure that it's clear to the public that there's no achos kukas. They might mistakenly think that there is achos kukas. But if we're being matir both brothers to both sisters, then obviously there's no achos kukas. But in the case where there's only one brother, and we allow him to marry the sister of his erba, then since they're sisters, there's more of a reason why the spectator would come to the mistaken conclusion that we were matir achos kukos. It's a little paradoxical, but he's saying the more we're matir, the more clear it is that there's no Easter. Since we're matir both brothers to marry both sisters, surely the asimon will go down. People will realize that there's no achos each time. And they'll rack their brains and come up with this wonderful conclusion because there's an erva relationship between both these sisters to both these brothers, right, respectively. But if there's only one brother, then we're wondering how are we allowing this brother to be having this, right, one of two sisters, unless we assume that there's no zika, there's no iser of achos kupas. That's the mistaken conclusion they're gonna arrive. So we go on now in the Mishnah. Lisha amru v'chulei achosa k'shiyivimto o choletzes o mitzyabemes. Right, so we'll review the Mishnah. These are the last words in the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Vav. Zui she'amru achosa k'shiyivimta o choletzes o misyabemes. Now, sometimes the Mishnah uses the word zaklal at the end of the Mishnah. Then the Gemara is going to ask, L'Ribuye Mai. Ze'aklal is a ribu. But when it says zu, it's a miut. So zui lemute mai. What case did the Mishnah have in mind that was being excluded? Well, the Gemara says lemute iser mitzvah lazeh, the iser mitzvah lazeh. So there's a shnios larayos relationship between the two sisters and the two brothers, respectively. So he gives a case here: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Rachel is a shnia to Levi, and Leah is a shnia to Yehuda. Reuven marries Rachel, who's a shnia to Levi. Shimon marries Leah, who's a shnia to Yehuda. And Reuven and Shimon die. Now, on a deraisa level, Rachel and Leah both require yibum because they're only shnios larayos. And furthermore, even if you're going to say that we go back to the deraisa halacha, so therefore we recognize the zika as a zika, even though despite the fact that you have an iser erva of shnios, so therefore you should have achos kukasa, but that's not true either because on a deraisa level there is no iser of achos kukasa. Again, the Gemara is going to ask the old question: Asu lamal. Hainu hach. What's the chiddush of this sefer? It's really repeating what we know in the Reish. And the Gemara explains the kash. Kevon mali lechad mali litre. Right, we said that in the case of one of the two sisters, again, in the case where there's only, let's say there's only Levi. So one of the two sisters is an erva of a shnia. So there's no possibility of yibum because on a deraisa level we have a zika. Because the Torah didn't recognize that erva. We should apply that logically to the case where there are two brothers and each one has an erva d'Rabbanan, a shnia l'rayos relationship to the Yevamot. What's the difference between two brothers and one brother? So again, there are two shnios, and we're going to exclude chalit, we're going to exclude yibum in both cases because of achos kukasa. We've already established that on a deraisa level, we don't recognize the erva of shnios to remove the zika. So back to achos kukasa. So why do you have to tell me again the same halacha in the case with the two brothers? So Gemara says, "Mal, the same. I might have thought. Ki lo amrinon uki iser mitzvah b'makom iser erva." Right, when we say that shnios harais does not remove the status of zika sivu, because on a deraisa level there is a zika sivu. That's only heicha the equal mix abisham shading. When there's another brother, and we have to make a gzeira that if we allow the first brother to be miyabeh, I'm sorry, that if we exclude yibum from the first brother, And why is that? Because on a derisa level, this erva is not an erva, and therefore there is zika, and therefore we have a case of achos kukosa. Now, this same, what does Mao the same mean? We need the Sefer, correct? If we only had the Resha, instead of Uki Iser Mitzvah, V'mokom Iser Erva, right? Exclude Yibum because Vachos because Ika Lemigzar Mishum Sheni. That if you would allow for Yibum, and you would somehow upgrade the status of an Erev D'Rabbanan Ki'ilu to an Erev D'Oraisa, then the other brother might come to be Miyabim, the other sister, Aval Hecha, the Lekel Migzah Mishum Sheni, Ema, Lahayu Kimna Iser Mitzvah Makom Iser Erev. So in other words, we don't understand, again, when I say we, I mean the spectator doesn't understand the lumbus of Shnias Larayas as only an Erev D'Rabbanan, which on a Deraisa level would not remove the Zika. What we're worried about then is a different thing. We're worried about the possibility that the spectator doesn't realize that there's something called Achos Kukasa. And therefore, Lahai Ukimna Iser Mitzvah Makom Iser Erva V'liyabnu. But Mashmalan, the Mishnah is telling me with the word Zu that only if there's an Erev D'Oraisa, then we could be Mater Yibum for the other sister. But if it's only an Iser Mitzvah, which B'Oraisa means that there is a Zikas Yibum, then Achosa is Asur Mishum Achos Skukasa. So let's go over the Gemara one more time. Hecha the Ikol Migzah Mishum Sheni is then we're going to say that we have a chash that the Sheni will come to be Miyabim once we were allowing the first one to be Miyabim. That's what we said over and over again, that the second brother, Yehuda in this case, is going to imitate his brother Levi. Aval Hecha the Lekel Migzah Mishum Sheni. What does that mean? Lekel Migzah Mishum Sheni. Right, because all we have now is the ratio. We're talking about a case where we only had the ratio, we didn't have the sefer. So in the ratio, there's no room for Gzeira Mishum Sheni because what? Because we already established that there's no Yimu. And why is it that Levi can't be Miyabim the other sister because she's achos kukasa, because on a deraisa level we don't recognize shnius larayos. Aval hecha. But in the case of the sefer, where there are two brothers, is lekel lemigza mishum sheni emalahai ukimna iser mitzvah makom iser erva ulahai ukimna iser mitzvah bimkom iser erva uliyama. That both of them could be miyabim, because in the mind of the spectator, we're going to equate shnios l'raisa as an erva with an erva doraisa. And once we do that, then there's no eshes kukaso, and therefore people are going to think that both of them are allowed to be miyabim. Is kamash malon. That's what the Mishnah is telling Zuhi, that only in the case of an achos erva doraisa, but in an Isur mitzvah where there is a Zika Doraisa, then we have the Isur Vachos Kukas. Right, this is where we'll stop. So we got up to here at Daf Ches Amid Beis. We can make a note of it. Omar Rabbi Yehuda Omar Ra. Where is that? Just 1 second. There it is. Okay, then we worked out why we need two Mishnayos, why we need the Reish and the Sefer now in Mishnah, and all the Havaminas therein. Have a great day.